Hi, Kim. Are you going to have an interview with me about my time in Korea?
Yes.
Well, it's so long ago, 1951. I was 20 years old, turned 21 there, and it was a great experience. We had just received our wings, qualified as pilots, with few hours over the qualifying, when they said it looked as though the Korean War would be over fairly soon, and we needed that experience. And it didn't turn out that way. The war went on until 1953. So I was there in 1951. It was a hectic year. There were very experienced pilots gone in the original squadron, and even with them and with us joining, we had heavy losses. Almost 29 in the year of 1951. Out of the total that we lost over the war, 35. So in the initial stages, the anti-aircraft was very bad. But I'm so pleased that I made it, because it was an experience, great experience.
What was your rank at the time?
I was a second lieutenant. Just shortly received my wings, and we were commissioned, and I was a second lieutenant.
And how old were you?
I was 20 years old then. I turned 21 during my tour there.
How about the rest of the pilots?
Well, as I said, there were many of World War II pilots, but they were just completing their tour already and were returning back to base. And we then went as replacements. And the powers to be thought it would be a great experience before the war would stop, and it didn't, in fact. As I said, it continued until 53.
Did you volunteer or were you?
Yes.
Why?
Well, you know what? I was a career, decided on the Air Force as my career, and my country had committed to helping the United Nations in the war, so it was quite a natural thing. You volunteer and sign on the dotted line, and off we went, And looking back, I'm pleased about the great experience. The sad part about it is having lost so many close friends, over such a short period of time.
Really? During the war, you lost many friends?
Yes. Well, as I said, it was just in that one first year, 1951, it was 29 pilots we lost. We lost a total of 35. So in the initial stages, the anti-aircraft and so forth was very hectic. But as that sort of decreased, the losses diminished also towards the end. And towards the end, they didn't fly the Mustang anymore like I did. They flew the Sabre, which was not as vulnerable, as the Mustang was.
The Mustang is very, very famous. Why is it so famous?
It started as a great aircraft in World War II, and it was vulnerable in that it had a coolant system with piping running, and being so easily damaged by anti-aircraft fire. That was the only drawback about it, but it handled well. The endurance was very long compared to a Spitfire that I flew previously, which had a very limited flight endurance. The Mustang had a very long endurance. There were flights up to 7 hours, with drop tanks and so forth.
Wow. Do you remember like a specific battle that was important to South Africa? So in South Africa, only Air Force?
Yes. Oh, no, that's wrong. The Air Force was the main contribution that we made, number 2 Cheetah Squadron. Oversized squadron because replacements, took quite a while because of the distance and so forth. But there were only also Army contingents, officers seconded to a British regiment. I can't remember offhand, 8 or 10 of them also shared in the war on the ground forces with the British.
Well, among other United Nations, there weren't too many Air Force, right?
Air Forces contributing there was USAF and our Air Force. And then the British also had aircraft flying from carriers. The Australians had Meteors, jet aircraft, not that successful in the role that they had to do in ground attack. I flew the Meteor later on in England. It was a good aircraft, but not quite suited for that war. Gee, I can't think of the other air forces.
Did you get to see any civilians, Korean civilians?
Near our base in Chunhae, down in the south of Korea, there was a naval base not far away, and there was a very nice in the sea that we could go swimming. And we went there, and I met quite a number of the young sailors would meet us. You know, we were like foreigners, and they were inquisitive, and we had chats and what have you. And talking to you know, people from the embassy, the present attaché is from the Navy, and he knows Chennai as well, where the naval base. So we had very enjoyable in our off periods. We were in Chennai in the south was our main base, but then we'd fly up to Seoul, where our forward base, and we did a lot of the operations we did from there.
And you visited Korea again?
Yes, I had
When?
3 visits.
Wow.
And my last visit was in June, or was it July? And I was very, very pleasantly surprised to be decorated by a decoration, a presidential decoration that the minister presented me with. In July it was, I think.
Last year, July 2016?
Yes.
Wow.
So that was quite something.
Korea is very different from when you first
Whoa! You know, it's quite unbelievable. I try to tell people what the country was ravished, you know, with the enemy going through Seoul right down to the south and then being pushed back again. And to see that country now, how it's been rebuilt, you know, it's just unbelievable just to see the road system and the buildings. It's so modern and very, very well organized and tidy. Very, very impressive. It's quite amazing that the industrial development is fantastic.
You must be very proud.
Oh, yes. And I'm pleased that I made that tiny, tiny little contribution.
Oh, it was not tiny. It was very big. It was very big. Yeah. And when you're involved with the association, and do you remember serving with some of the members of the association in Korea?
A member of?
The Korean War Veterans Association here in South Africa. Your comrades.
Yes.
Yes. Do you remember? Do you serve in the same unit?
Well, we only had the one unit, 2 squadron.
2 squadrons. How many were in each squadron?
No, we were only 1 squadron.
1 squadron.
Yeah.
How many?
Well, pilots, we were strength more or less 20 at the time, pilots, and they were replaced as we had, you know, they completed their tour process and so forth.
Must have been very close.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
No, very, very close bond of the people who served in Korea. But there's so few left at the moment.
I know.
Like today, there are only 2 of us. My friend who came here a prisoner of war, he would also have been here, but he had another commitment and what have you. But I'm not sure offhand, but I don't know whether we have more than 10 or so pilots left, you know. A very good friend of mine passed away last week down in Natal.
Did you say you were also captured?
Say again?
Were you also captured?
No. I was fortunate. I spent just over 4 hours on ground, very far north of Pyongyang, near the Yalu River. But I was fortunate. I was picked up by a helicopter after about just over 4 hours.
How did you get stranded on the ground? Why were you on the ground?
I had to bail out of my aircraft.
Why?
Because it wouldn't fly anymore. It was so I had to, you know, bail out by parachute.
Really?
Yeah.
By yourself?
Yes, it's a single-seater aircraft. You know, it's a fighter aircraft.
And who picked you up? South African?
No. A helicopter that was launched from an American ship, the Gunston Hall. It says Gunston Hall.
But how did they see you?
Well, they were given the map reference, and they could navigate there. And as it happened, it was very mountainous there, and I came up the valley, and I could hear this chuck of a S-51 Sikorsky approaching me and so forth. And I'll never forget that welcome sight when he hovered. He didn't land, he just hovered, and they lowered a rope. And they hoisted me up. And the pilot turned around and shook my hand. And then we went out again. And on the way out, we were fired at again. And it was hit a few times.
So
And
that
we had difficulty when we were escorted again by fighters going out. And then I was unaware what the damage was on the aircraft. But on his first approach to land on the ship, he had to go around again. He couldn't land because of the controls. I think there was something wrong with the controls. And then on the second attempt, we landed and so forth. And then I was taken to the sick bay, and when I arrived there, there was an American pilot from a Corsair that had been shot down. And he unfortunately left it too late before he decided to bail out. And he was fairly badly burnt, you know, in his hands and his face and so forth. I had the advantage that one of our pilots had also left it a bit late. So we all knew if the temperature started going off the clock, it was time for you to make sure that you got out in time before it burst into flames, you know.
the helicopter that picked you up, was it United States Air Force or Navy pilot?
It's a naval pilot.
Naval pilot.
Yes.
Wow.
The USS Gunston Hall. Later on, somebody visited America, and they, by perchance, I think, that one of our newspapers met the captain of the aircraft, of the ship who was at the time, and I've got some newspaper cuttings and so forth, you know, that of the, and he also explained or repeated the story again and what have you. It's quite a small world.
So he was a naval pilot who picked you up?
Yes, yes.
And you got to meet him again?
No, unfortunately not, you know.
Oh, but you later learned about it.
Yes.
That is.
Well, you see, a newspaper man from South Africa visited America and by chance met the captain of the ship, who was the captain of the USS Gunston Hall at the time.
What was it called? USS
Gunston Hall was the name of the ship. Hall, yeah.
And the Navy pilot was from that.
Yes, from
ship,
that.
USS Gunston Hall.
Yeah.
Wow. You know, it would be so fascinating for you to have a reunion with some of the people, because I interviewed many veterans, and they talk about each other. You know, like British talk about Australian, British talk about Americans. So it would be nice to do a reunion. Did you have any Australians? Did you see any Australians?
Once there were some Australian pilots who visited us, and we had quite a party and so forth, but they were, at another base quite a distance. But we were 3 American squadrons with our squadron formed the 18th Fighter Bomber Wing. And we had very, very good relationships with the 3 American squadrons. Very, very good experience.
What did you do for a rest when you didn't have missions?
Well, the main thing was swimming, as I mentioned, near that naval base. I think that was, fortunately, I was there only in summer. If you talk to people who were there in winter, it's another story.
Well, I think you were fortunate.
Very fortunate.
Yes.
So the time off was spent.
How long was your service? How many months?
I was only there for over 5 months.
5 months.
And I've completed
In 1951.
the normal tour we had to do was 75 missions, but I went down on my 73rd one. And when I got back, a helicopter picked me up, and then I was taken by a small ship to island, Yodo Island, off the Wonsan Harbour, and then with a very dicey sort of a trip in a Dakota aircraft, went back to my base and so forth. And when I walked into the office, because we'd lost so many of our young course already, as I walked in, he said, "Mike, pack your bags, you're going home." So I still had, I still had 3 missions to go. But he said, "You've had enough," because there were so many of our course, who had been shot down already.
So
Okay.
on average, how many missions did you fly per day?
Oh, the most possibly 4 on average. It's difficult to say actually, because it's been, as I said, we'd fly missions and then you'd have a day or so off and then you'd fly missions again. By far the most I think we ever did was 4, because it was mostly long missions, 2 hours, 3, 4 hours, hour and a
And
half.
you would look
So it
for
varied a lot depending on what type of mission it was and so forth.
And you would look for the enemies?
Well, our task was ground attack. We mainly looked for vehicles bringing down, ammunition and supplies and what have you.
And you would shoot them?
And then we would take them out. And they became so clever and so good at camouflage. Eventually, they didn't travel by day at all. They'd only travel by night. And during the day, they would hide their vehicles so well. It was quite something. But it's quite amazing, actually. One of my early missions, I flew with one of the experienced pilots, a commanding officer from World War II, who was a ground attack pilot. And I could then learn from him, and we all learned from him. We were a number of second lieutenants, young pilots. We flew out to another target, and he spotted some vehicles. And he made his first attack and fired, and then when the first vehicle burst into flames, we could also then make out the other vehicles. But I'm sure if we had flown past there, we would never have seen the vehicles. So it was his experience that helped us, and then so we also became quite experienced.
And you guys, there were solo missions?
Say again?
Solo missions, or did you fly
No,
alongside?
a flight of 4.
4.
We're normally a flight of 4. And then we did that, the big raid we did on Pyongyang. We had 64. We had the biggest with 64 aircraft.
64 aircraft?
Yeah.
Not all South African, though.
No. The 3 American squadrons and our squadron. So we make up a quarter of the squadron. Yeah.
And how many losses did you suffer from that one, out of the 64?
On that one, we lost the one pilot. It was quite a sad loss, because at the time he was a South African high jumping champion, And
What's a high jumping champion?
yeah.
Excuse me?
Pardon?
So, can you explain to me about the jumper? You said he lost
In
his
athletics,
power?
high jumping, when you have 2 poles and a crossbar, and they
He was a
didn't.
champion?
He at that stage his style was American roll, I think it was called. It's changed quite a lot now. See, they sort of go over on their back, to across the crossbar. But his record stood for several years after that, South African high jumping record.
But he
And
died.
that was a sad loss. He would have made a very good rugby player. He was a great rugby player also. 20 years old and
He got shot down?
Yeah.
His plane got shot down?
Say again?
His plane got shot down? His plane?
Yes. He called up. He said, I've been hit, heading for the coast, but I don't think I'll make it. And then he was cut off. I think the aircraft then possibly burst into flames or so.
You know, when that happens, when the pilot, right, his aircraft is down and his body is burned, then how do you retrieve the remains?
Oh no, there are very few remains of. We lost quite a percentage of our pilots, which never recovered, because it's on the other side of the bomb line.
So not even the
No, the ones
necklace,
that
not even the dog tag.
No, the very, very few were recovered if they were near the bomb line, the dividing line between enemy forces and our own forces. No, I can't quote you the numbers now. I know of a person, because I got close friends with him. He was a captain and a very experienced pilot from World War II. I think later on the area where he went down had been recovered and was in our own friendly territory, and they traced the remains, and he was buried in the memorial cemetery down in Busan.
Oh, I will be going there.
Is it? Yes.
Yes.
Well, there you'll see, I can't remember offhand now, possibly 7 or so of the graves. And the others are people who were, not recovered because they were too far into enemy territory.
Well, I'm going to the memorial today.
Say again?
I'm going to the memorial today,
yes,
and
yeah.
I will pay my respects.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. My pleasure.